Hello, I'm Christina Wyckoff. I'm the historical archaeologist at the Oklahoma State Historic Preservation Office, and I want to welcome you to today's Lunch and Learn presentation. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce Shelby Ward. Shelby is an attorney, Choctaw Freedman, community historian, and genealogist. She is co-founder of the the Beck Genealogical Society and the Oklahoma Freedmen Collective, and her presentation is African-Diasporic Peoples of Oklahoma and Indian Territory, Genealogy, Story, and Culture. Thank you, Shelby.
Thank you, Christina. I will load my slides here. I will minimize to let you all see the content. Okay. Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on what time zone you're coming in. And so thank you to everyone for coming to this presentation, also the Oklahoma Historical Society and the State Historic Preservation Office for hosting these Lunch and Learn sessions. So as Christina mentioned, I'm Shelby Ward, and I do many things with history and genealogy, and I have family history from Oklahoma. I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and my mother is from Oklahoma, and so I have some family photos here. I've had family roots in Muskogee, Wewoka, Atoka, Oklahoma. So these are some of the places that I research because I have family and community that are of these places, and so I'm excited to share some of the things that I've learned with everyone because we all have our family stories, and it's important to know these stories and to tell these stories for life today and then also future generations. So I would say that the mission or purpose that I have here is to explore key themes in genealogy of African-descendant peoples and share research tips for people exploring Black communities in Oklahoma. So if you're just starting out, I have some things here for you. And then if you spent time doing genealogy in depth, hopefully there are some nuggets that you can take and consider as I share my content today. And with that, I am sharing general principles and sharing examples from my frame of reference. But these are principles that anyone can apply to whatever place or family that is of interest to them. And then, of course, because we're talking about Oklahoma, there are some, I think, unique attributes to researching in this state that can be valuable to folks that are researching Black communities in Oklahoma. So with that, I have my 6 main topics, and this is to help me stay on track as we spend lunchtime today thinking about what we're going to explore. And so I have these verbs here with more detail. So learn, trace, inquire, listen, understand, and create. So learn. It's important to read Black history and visit sites so you can get a sense of background information so you can orient yourself and put things into perspective in the right way. Trace, study migration patterns. And these are important because people are coming and going outside of Oklahoma. And so knowing where people are at certain points is really valuable information. Inquire. With researching genealogy, it's so valuable to have questions and research planning so you can stay organized. 4, listen. And so listen to the voices of our elders and ancestors. People are best suited to be able to narrate their own experiences. And so it's important to learn from these primary sources. 5, understand. And so consider things in context. So the big picture, so we can interpret and connect the information to tell a holistic and honest narrative. And then 6, create. I think it's important to really create cultural artifacts for our families and communities so stories and history can be retained for posterity. And with that, I want to dive into these subjects, but I wanted to talk about key terms here because of my title. I use the term African-Diasporic, and so I wanted to make sure folks are all on the same page with that. So the African diaspora is a voluntary and involuntary movement of Africans and their descendants to various parts of the world. So we're talking about a global population in the past and then the present, and it's with respect to the migration of African peoples. And so I have this diagram, it's a map, just showing some of those migrations. So many people, of course, here are familiar with the transatlantic slave trade. But when we're considering this as a global descriptor, we're also talking about movement east out of Africa too into Asia, and then also into South America, and then, of course, into Europe as well. And so terms that we, may use in genealogy or history are talking about peoples, Black, African, African-American, freedmen of the Five Tribes. They're distinct with respect to what place we're talking about, what people we're talking about, what time we're talking about. And so in this presentation, I'll be talking about people that would be considered freedmen of the Five Tribes. So Choctaw, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Seminole, Freedmen, etc. And then folks that would be considered African American, so from states that were established coming into Oklahoma before 1907 or after. And some of these folks would be in different categories depending on what time and place we're talking about. Yes, and so here I have the map with Oklahoma acknowledging its varied history, because depending on what time you're talking about, some people of African descent may call tribal homelands home. If you're talking about the historic homelands of Cherokee or Chickasaw peoples, Indian Territory or Oklahoma Territory before 1907, and then of course the state of Oklahoma, which was established in 1907, and then the contemporary land bases of tribes that we have today. So with that terminology out of the way, I wanted to explain some of the art that I have in the background and migration here. And so that title slide and then the slide art that I have coming forward is a piece of art from Jacob Lawrence. So he was a painter, and he did a lot of mural art documenting Black experiences, including the Great Migrations. And he said this, and I think that it's important when we're considering genealogy and storytelling here. So if at times my productions do not express the conventionally beautiful, there is always an effort to express the universal beauty of man's continuous struggle to lift his social position and to add dimension to his spiritual being. And so I think this is a theme that you'll see in Black stories with these movements and migrations, and then a hope for building into the future. And so with that, let's get into those main ideas that I talked about, which I consider tips for if you're doing your genealogy or if you're doing history research for African-Diasporic people groups. So first, learn some basic background information that will help you understand communities in Oklahoma better. And this is important because, unfortunately, histories and stories of Black communities are commonly understudied. And so sometimes people don't have basic knowledge to help them understand who is who and where things are happening. And so as a researcher, it's important to fill that gap so you can learn the best you can. And so you can learn by reading, and you can also learn by visiting places within Oklahoma. And so for titles, and I have copies of these, and then also I have pictures of the books on the slides here. So the first one, if you're interested in the stories of Freedmen of the Five Tribes, the Chickasaw Freedmen, A People Without a Country, Daniel Littlefield is a good reference. Black Indians and Freedmen, this is a more recent book by Dickerson Cousin. And then also other books too. Hannibal Johnson, he's written a number of different books, and so I just have one here about all Black towns. And then also the WPA Oklahoma Slave Narratives. And these are available online for free in several places, but also the book compilation is helpful because of its background information. So this is a very good resource that we have from that oral history project. And so those are titles with respect to history generally, but also like genealogy books are important too. And so two that I have here that are good for Black communities in Oklahoma and also outside, Finding a Place Called Home by D. Palmer Woodter. So this is a foundational book in Black genealogy research that just has a lot of great ways to get started and information that you can use as reference. And then also Tony Burrows' Black Roots for 20th century research, some more recent times, but it's a great reference. And then, of course, if you're dealing with Freedmen of the Five Civilized Tribes, the works of Angela and Walton Raji, and she's written several books. She has a blog that you can look to as well. And then, of course, this one, Black Indian Genealogy Research. And so definitely read, learn some basic information, but go out there, go visit these places, go to historic sites within Oklahoma that are connected to your family. And so for me, I mentioned that I'll be sharing specific examples. And so one of the communities that my family's from is Wewoka, Oklahoma. And so I have a picture here from the Seminole Nation Museum. So it's a museum in Wewoka about the city, I should say, rather. And it was actually founded by John Horse, who was a Seminole leader. And he did a lot of great things. And on this page, you can read about the museum and what they offer, and then also about Seminole freedmen and the Seminole Nation. And this is a picture of, or I should say, a drawing commonly used when talking about John Horse. And one amazing thing about Wewoka is that it has this rich history with respect to the history of the Seminole Nation, and then it being named for this creek. And so the geography of the area. And so in going to Wewoka, just learning about my family history and going to see places where I've had connections, visiting a church. And so this picture was from May 2017. So my family and I visited Jones Temple CME Church. And so this was a church that one of my ancestors co-founded. And so it was great to see this building and then to also notice the cornerstone. And so with this here, it has the names of people that established the church, the name of the church, and the date. So in 1925. And that's a picture further back so you can see the cornerstone within the brick of the building. And then this is the headstone of one of my ancestors. And so in terms of visiting places, going to buildings, talking with people that are there, and then of course cemeteries, because you have literally the community there documented. And so visiting his headstone and then other relatives in their community was something that was important. So it was a very rich learning experience. And so so my first tip was learning. And then second is to really study and think about the migration pattern, so the geography of your family. And I don't know, I don't think this can be overstated with genealogy research because location is so important. So you can sound like a realtor, location, location, location. Because where your ancestors are dictates what libraries or what repositories you should be going to visit to have information that's relevant to your family history. And the Oklahoma Historical Society is a great resource. There's so much information there for folks that have relatives from Oklahoma. And then also there's a community of researchers that are familiar with those record sets. So it's a great resource to tap into with respect to anyone that has Oklahoma ancestor or people that lived in Oklahoma in your family. And with respect to migration, one thing that I think that's important to keep in mind is to have a sense of when your family may have come to Oklahoma. So every family's different. So some families may have been there for before it was even territory. Some families came to Indian territory or they came to Oklahoma territory. And then this is something that's important too. Many people left Oklahoma in the 20th century for economic reasons or other things. And so keeping track of those relatives are important too, because sometimes people have information that are in California or in Missouri. And for example, my grandfather, he went to Kansas. And so I grew up there. And also to keep track of travel within the state of Oklahoma. So some families stayed in one place, but then others may have traveled to different counties or cities or areas within tribal homelands. And then, of course, travel back to the state of Oklahoma. So people that return later after maybe coming to live in different states like California or what have you. And so with this, I have a map from the National Park Service. And so this is a map of the Trail of Tears. So the Trail of Tears National Historic Trail, I should say specifically. And so that trail has tended to focus on Cherokee migration, or I should say forest removal. But it's a map that represents that. And with respect to the other tribal nations, there are also pathways to consider for folks that are descendants of, say, freedmen from the Five Tribes, and with respect to that migration out of the homelands and how their families came to Indian territory in the 19th century. And then this map, I also wanted to share, and I would say these are more infographics from the Census Bureau. And these represent the Great Migration. So those familiar with this history, within the 20th century, we had two Great Migrations, which describe the internal movement within the United States of Black Americans for economic opportunities, and then also to escape racism common in certain portions of the area. And so with respect to Oklahoma, you can see here in several places how folks may have left certain areas of Oklahoma and then moved into others. And so with the Great Migration, you have people maybe moving from different states, but also, and I think this is important within Oklahoma thinking too, moving from more rural areas to cities. And so in some families, you may see folks moving from a more rural area of Oklahoma to a city in Oklahoma with regard to these particular movements. And so again, why this is significant, it's important to be aware of locations, to know where you should research, libraries, museums, etc. And it's so important to be aware of family members that lived outside of Oklahoma, because sometimes family stories are retained in different branches, and those folks may live elsewhere. And so some of my relatives in Oklahoma that I study in research, their descendants live in Nebraska, or they live in California. And so it's important to be aware of those things so you can have a sense of who you should talk to, who might know information about your family. And then, of course, it's important to not just know where your families may be moved over time, but to identify documents associated with the movement. And so depending on what those migrations are, there's particular record sets that are relative to those. And so I have an example here, yes. And so as a Choctaw Freedman, I had family that lived in present day northern Mississippi that were forcibly removed into Indian territory in the 19th century. And so this is one page from a National Archives record set. They have immigration, they call them immigration muster rolls that the military would use to document travelers. So in this photo, you see at the top, muster roll of Chickasaw Indians who immigrated to the Chickasaw District in the Choctaw Nation in the summer and fall of 1843. And so within this document, you have a table, and on the left, you have names of heads of families. And so you have the different families here. So the R.B. Willis family, James L. Tyson, Reuben Berlin, etc. And then they have the number of individuals by type in this table. And so in this table, you have number and ages of Indians. So male first, and then female. And within those, you have under 10. And then they have it broken down for adults based upon age, and then the same with females. And then the next column, you have slaves, so enslaved persons. And so this is where you'll find some information with respect to some of my ancestors, so males and females. And then at the end, you have the total number of persons and then horses. And then at the far right, there are notes. And so here it says a death on the roads in a certain place. And then some details about families. And then at the bottom, of course, it's signed. And so for me, this was an important find with thinking about, say, where my family was in 1843, what they were doing, and then connecting that with other documents that I'm aware of. And then I highlighted this box here because with this particular cluster of my family were members of the R.B. Willis household. So this was actually Wallace Willis and his family are in this bunch, so captured with the 3 males and then the 4 females. And folks that are interested, I did a more detailed presentation about Wallace that's available on YouTube through the Oklahoma Historical Society. Yes. So these documents are important when you're thinking about migration. So if you're a freedman, there are documents related to the Trails of Tears, so those are important record sets to consider. But for everyone, Google Maps is another tool. So I know in genealogy we're very document centered, but sometimes having graphical representations can be really helpful to connect the dots and to maybe think about information in new ways. And so I have two pictures. Yeah, I have two here. Yeah, of maps that, or one map that I've made just using Google Maps. And so it's just like going to Google if you're, trying to find a restaurant or what have you, but there's a way for you to customize the maps. And so here I put different dots for towns or locations where my family has lived. And so with that red line, that's one cluster. And so I have the old Dokesville. So my ancestors were removed to Dokesville from Holly Springs, Mississippi. And so Holly Springs, Mississippi is over here on the right side of the page, or I should say screen, and then coming into the Choctaw Nation, or I should say present day Choctaw Nation. And then also I've had family from there go to Atoka. And so there's a line that I connected from Dokesville to Atoka. And then later, members of that family moved to Muskogee, so further up north. And it's really interesting now with Google Maps when you have the contemporary base layer, because now the tribal governments are reflected. And so, for example, here in the Oklahoma map, you can see the Chickasaw Nation, Choctaw Nation, Muskogee Creek Nation, Cherokee Nation all here, and the Osage Reservation. So for us researchers, it's helpful to be able to orient ourselves in that way. And then with respect to the blue migration here, so I also have family members from Texas. So African Americans from Texas that lived there in the 19th century and then left and came into Indian territory, so the Seminole Nation. And so that's how I got to Wewoka. So those pictures I showed you earlier in the presentation. So I have a dot for Honey Grove, Texas. And then from Honey Grove, folks lived in Paris, Texas. And so that's all in northern Texas. And then they later moved to Wewoka. And so I have those blue lines connecting those places. Oops, let me come back here. Okay. Yeah, and then this is just a close-up. And so I would encourage people to play around with it, the Google Map tool, just to see spatially where your ancestors are, and it might give you some new ideas. Like I didn't, maybe think to look in this county that's next to where they lived, or this city's pretty close. And so, for example, here, one thing that I can mention, Fort Smith, Arkansas. So you notice its location. So that's an important place with respect to genealogy records, because there were certain records kept at Fort Smith in the 19th century. So I didn't have, Fort Smith as a point on my map per se, at least for this family cluster, but it's a place that has information relative to my family that's important. So when you're representing things spatially on paper through maps, it can, give you new ideas to think about things in a new way, which is important. So yes, so we talked about learning background information. We talked about tracing, and so 3, inquiring. And so here it's really about planning, being organized. So form a research question, ask yourself questions that you want to learn answers to, and develop a research plan so you can be strategic with what you're doing with your genealogy research. And so here, ask a question. And it can be about whatever you're curious about. Some people are interested in maybe learning about their mother's side or father's side because they were close to them, or maybe there's a particular family story that they want to know if it's true or not. Or maybe it's a interest in a particular profession. So some people are interested in family members that were farmers or involved in a certain industry like the railroads. And I encourage people to do this because it'll help you focus. Sometimes with research, you can just, dig on and on and on in record sets online, get into rabbit holes. But you can, really paint a picture if you come up with a question and focus on that. And like I said, whatever speaks to you. So it could be related to an artifact that you might find. So maybe there's a family quilt and you want to know who made that quilt. Where did they get the materials from? Who helped make the quilt? How did they learn quilting? There could be family pictures. Most families do have a cache somewhere of family photos, and it might be at your aunt's place or a grandparent. And so, who were in these pictures? Where were they living? What were they doing? What was important to them? So, these are all worthy questions that you can dig into in a research context. And then I think here, yeah, so family food. So if there are recipes or certain family gatherings, all of these things might be of interest, and you could just pick what speaks to you. And I would encourage people to maybe not just stop with one when they're brainstorming, but depending on the scope of the question, they can hone in on one if they want to, so we can focus our research. And so after you have a question, it's important to create a plan. So how are you going to answer that question? What will you do next? And so a good plan will help you consider what you already know. So maybe you already know some relatives that might have leads, or you can identify some documents that can help you to start. And then to work towards getting new information. And I guess this is a good time. So I created a handout that should be uploaded within the platform, and Christina can help us identify that. But I have a list of resources, and some of them are things that I've already talked about in the presentation. But on that handout, I have links to some Family Tree magazine resources. So they have some great forums to help you organize your research. And they also have some sample research plans. And I tried to pick very simple ones that you can, look to so you can see how you should structure your research process. Oh, and I have the picture here of the website. And so these are available for free, and they might ask for your email address, but you can document, or you can get as many as you'd like, download them, print them out, or fill them in on your computer. And this is one example. So an ancestor research worksheet. And so you're really getting into detail so you can keep track of what you know and fill in gaps. So name, social security number if you have it for a later ancestor, where they were born, where they died, other relationships, people they know, things like that. And so when we're talking about learning more information, I do want to stop and explain something in diagram form, because I think it can be encouraging for folks. So I have a blue box. And so imagine with me with this blue box that this is the totality of all known information, all knowledge of the universe. And that this triangle is what's possible for you to learn through your genealogy research. And this is not to scale. And I say this because sometimes folks can be very focused on what they don't know. Well, I don't know this, I don't know that. And so with our research, this is not an exercise of learning everything, but understand that there are limitations, but you can still learn more, right? And so again, the triangle, what's possible to learn from really genealogy research. So start with what you know, like the top, maybe some things that are easy, things that happen more recently, people you're familiar with, things like that. And you can keep digging to get to what you could know or what you can learn if you keep looking. And so this is a process. And here's the magic. So it takes time, looking into records that exist from digitalization projects, so documents that are one place that have been digitized, going physically to places so you can see the original copies or things that aren't available online. You discuss with elders, other people you know, so you learn from folks like we talked about, the hand of your ancestors. So many of us genealogists have talked about, feeling, being led to certain things and places for us to grow. Snacks, so making sure you're caring for yourself in this process. And then, one of my favorites, clap, clap, learning how to research better, because, having a good methodology will help you. So you can do all of these things to learn more. And so be empowered. When we organize, when we plan, we can be better researchers. And with that, everyone's triangle looks a little different. So I know sometimes there's comparisons in genealogy, like this person can go back X number of generations, some people not as many, but we can all learn more than what we know now. And it's also important not to give up before you even try. I've had people tell me that certain things were not possible or certain things did not exist, and they would just give up before they even tried. And I've done this long enough to learn and know things that I didn't know and learn when I started in the past. And so I know that we're all capable to learn and do more with what we have. And so on that handout, too, I have a link to a podcast episode, and it's a link to a research at the National Archives and Beyond episode about, quote, artificial brick walls. And it's just very important, I think, to take a listen to that episode to get a sense of how you can equip yourself to be able to start genealogy or to get past things that you think may be holding you back, but maybe not if you can just learn some new things. Yes, so next, listen. And this can be akin to considering like the importance of oral history. So speaking with relatives, elders, and communities. But I also have some information here about Black newspapers. So looking at primary sources from that record set as well. So listen, I know that we've talked about libraries and museums and record sets, but I would say that the most important place for anyone to really start is in your family, in your community. So if you're not talking to folks, you're missing out on a lot. So ask elders and relatives about family stories. And even speaking to what we call lateral relatives is helpful, because I know for some folks that get started maybe when they're a little bit older and their parents have become ancestors or other older folks. But within families, people know different things. They were living in different places. They remember different things. So even if you're talking to siblings or even relatives that are younger than you, depending on the context, can provide information. And I'll also say this, consider your family, associates, and neighbors, and that should be friends, associates, and neighbors. I need to change that on the slide. So in genealogy, this is called the fan, because sometimes folks may only focus on like their direct ancestors or maybe just people that they're like, quote, biologically related to. But all of our ancestors lived in communities that knew things. And so they're knowledgeable neighbors. They're knowledgeable people that maybe went to the same schools as your ancestors, worked with your ancestors. And one thing I consider here is that one of my grandmothers died when she was 34 years old. And so I never met her. And so she died long ago in the 1960s. But her best friend is still alive today. And so then she would be that F in the fan, friend, associate, neighbor. And so that's something that's important to consider when, speaking with folks. And so a few more things here. So visit people in person, especially with elders, if possible, as much as you can when you're connecting. Get permission if you do take notes or if you're recording. Some people are not comfortable with that, so you just have to make sure that you're being ethical in everything. And then also with that, don't be extractive. So contribute to your family as culture keeping and meaning making in some ways. So don't see it as an exercise of me just getting information. But if you are just in relationship and you just say, hey, can you talk to me about what it was like when you were a kid or when our family lived here? And then with that, I did put this on the handout too. So Nika Soul-Smith, Cherokee Freedman, citizen of the Cherokee Freedman genealogist. She has an interview primer that you can get. It's a PDF download. It's really expansive in terms of the types of varieties of questions that you can look to. But this is another tool that may be of interest in your genealogy or family history research journey. And so here, I also have this slide about newspapers. And so speaking with folks directly is important, but I think also with respect to the genealogy of people of African descent in Oklahoma, there's a rich resource here that everybody should definitely look at if you're interested in these communities. And this is the African American newspaper collection that's on the Gateway to Oklahoma History website. This is such a valuable tool. And then folks that are also nearby the actual center, there are more newspapers available on microfilm. And then if you're not there, you can request copies through interlibrary loan. Staff can tell me about availability, but even if it's available at other places, you could still look to see what's in the catalog. But I've learned so much from just reading the newspapers, and it's helped in my research. And so, yes, an example of this, Oklahoma has had many Black newspapers across the decades, but one in particular that's important is the Black Dispatch. And Roscoe Dungy was the editor, creator of the Black Dispatch, and it just has so much information about Blacks in various places in Oklahoma, so not just in Oklahoma City. And it is a valuable newspaper, one among those in the collection. And so I have a picture of some content from an issue of the Black Dispatch. This is from October 27, 1934. And so this is one that I actually got on microfilm. And so you see the slants because I was taking a picture from the microfilm machine. But here, there was information about Wewoka again. So I'm coming back to Wewoka. And it is about the church. So that church that I took a picture of that you saw at the beginning of this presentation, Jones Temple. So services at Jones Temple. CME Church Sunday opened with a splendid Sunday school. Reverend W.H. Hampton preached a soul-stirring sermon at the morning hour, and then it goes on. And then later, again, our ranks have been broken into by death, taking one of our dearest, Brother Tal Jones. Brother Jones was a pioneer of Wewoka in the CME Church. And so Tal Jones, one of my ancestors, great genealogy piece of information here, documenting information about his death. So I know that it happened near this date, October 27th, 1934, but I'm also learning about the church that he was a member of, his community, what's happening at that church, who was the pastor. And with these newspapers, this is what you'll see. You'll see a column and it'll have the location, but then it will go on and on describing the activities in that location. I have some more examples here. And on another page, and this is from the same issue in October of 1934, there's this card of thanks. And so here, we take this method of thanking our many friends for the kindness and sympathy shown us during the illness and death of our father, Tal Jones, who passed away October 17th. So I have a particular date. We especially wish to thank, and then it goes on, Reverend W.M. Carter of Chickasaw for his words of consolation, and all others who appeared on the program during the funeral service. So I'm even learning about the funeral from a newspaper. And then it goes on to mention cards from the following were found among the floral offerings. So people are giving flowers and cards. So from Mr. and Mrs. G.E. Nichols, Mr. and Mrs. H.H. Hubbard, Mrs. J.B. Williams, Jones Temple CME Church, and then it goes on and on. And so I'm able to learn so much about the social universe of my relatives by reading Black newspapers. And I considered putting understand with my newspaper discussion, but it bleeds into it. And then we'll continue to look at newspapers as examples. A next standalone tip is to consider whole communities in context, because this is so important. Again, there can be a tendency in our research to focus on grandma, grandpa, these solo figures, but we're really missing out when we do that. And I have an example here. So, and I can't hear everyone right now, and so I'll take a moment for people to answer this question for themselves. But I have a picture of someone here, and folks should probably know who he is. So if you're, listening, you can say who this is, type it in the chat. I don't know, the chat may be disabled, but who is this person? And some of you have correctly identified that this is Justice Thurgood Marshall. So the first African-American Black person appointed to the Supreme Court, litigated Brown v. Board of Education. We know who this individual is as a person. many of us have even seen this picture because this is his official justice photo. But how many of us have seen this picture? And so this is a picture of Thurgood when he was a young man with a client, so Donald Murray. So he was one of the plaintiffs that Thurgood had earlier in his career with respect to desegregation litigation. And then the man on the far right is Charles Hamilton Houston. So Charles Hamilton Houston founded the law school at Howard University, so taught Thurgood Marshall. And so with this picture, you're looking at a bigger community. So you're seeing some of Thurgood Marshall's earlier work, how he became the man that he was later, who was appointed, and then also seeing a mentor. So you're understanding a multi-generational dynamic here and the legacy and the work of a singular person. And then we also have this picture, which is also a little less common. And so Thurgood Marshall is in this picture with a group of other Black attorneys, and Thurgood is in the far right corner. And this picture is from the 1947 National Bar Association. So this is the National Bar Association for Black lawyers. And then it has all the names of folks. So Richard Atkinson, Margaret Haywood, Thurgood Dodson, etc. And so Thurgood was a part of a community of lawyers that they were able to learn from each other, support each other, and they were able to do what they did in their respective fields. And so when we're able to look at someone in context in their community, it can help us answer questions like, why did they do what they did? How were they able to do what they did? Instead of just maybe having a very, very narrow focus, it's important to look at the constellation of individuals around people. So I have this. So community, connections, love equals possibility. So, understanding what our ancestors do. And so again, keeping this in mind, studying people in context, looking at the community as a whole, and coming back to Black newspapers and why it's so helpful. Black newspapers, especially during this time, document a community, and they're telling us things about the social universe that you won't get in other types of sources. And so in a way, it's like social media. So as we saw before with the example I had with my ancestor, I got details about a funeral, a church service, and they're just very specific to that community. And so it's like, reading an Instagram feed or your Facebook feed of like your local community happenings in today. And so some more examples here, and I put the picture of the headstone. So remember, I have like names of folks that I know knew my ancestor in Wewoka, people that were at this named on this cornerstone at the church. And so coming back to Black newspapers, I, thought about some of those names, those individuals, and I was not just looking for like my ancestors in the newspaper, but who were all these other people in the news, or who are all these other people in the community too? And so these are, the next few slides have some stories and photos of things I gathered from Black newspapers. And so there are photographs of some residents of the Wewoka area here. And so I have the picture of Dr. J.J. Chandler in the upper left. So he was a physician and surgeon in the area. He was a business owner. Professor J.R. Coffey and then E.L. Coffey. So they were in the education space. And then Professor W.F. Davidson, he was a teacher in Lima near Wewoka, and he also owned a grocery store. And then Dr. Andrew H. Tyson, who was a doctor, also owned a drugstore and a newspaper in Lima. And then his wife, Mrs. L.A. Tyson, and she had some kind of loan business. So in newspapers, you'll see photographs, you'll hear about people that work in different sectors, business, education, etc. You'll see ads for businesses. And so Wewoka in 1915, for example, had dry goods stores, grocery stores, tailors, etc., owned by Black residents. And then these are some ads that I found. And so that's interesting too. So look at the stories, but look at the advertisements and the classifieds. And these are some classifieds for professionals. So doctors, dentists, and again, in Wewoka, there were 5 Negro dentists, or 5 Negro physicians rather, and 1 Negro dentist. Social information, and so I mentioned funerals before, but all kinds of things, parties, travels, births, and then deaths. And so this is a column from, and then the year cuts off, but it's in the 1910s from Wewoka. And so at the top, the location, and I guess I should say this too. I took newspaper extracts from Wewoka, but they have um, columns, social columns about all of various areas in Oklahoma that have Black population. So um, what is it? A dinner party, people being sick, Mrs. R. Johnson returning from a visit, a card party at someone's house, and then also other information about people's travels, um, trips, community functions, and I have this one here, a candy exhibition, February 17th in the 1920s. R.M. McClendon, the Candyman of Wewoka. So just a very colorful detail that adds to the understanding of the community. Here, also a newspaper column from 1913, a banquet for Thanksgiving in a community setting. So November 27th, 1913, in the auditorium of the Chandler Building. So you remember I showed a picture, or I had some information about the Chandler family earlier. It's being given to honor visiting friends, and then Dr. B.C. Chandler, manager of the building. And so here, again, I think this is my last slide for this one, context. And so remember, this was a picture of Roscoe Dunjee, so the editor of the Black Dispatch, a singularly amazing person, and he wrote about community, and also community honored him and valued him. And so these are two pictures on the left that I have from the Oklahoma Historical Society. So this wasn't on the gateway, but this was in the catalog. So the bottom picture has a picture of Roscoe Dunjee addressing the audience at his retirement dinner in 1955. And then the upper left corner is none other than Thurgood Marshall addressing the group at Roscoe Dunjee's retirement dinner in 1955. And I would love to know what Thurgood Marshall said. I don't know if there's documentation of that, but it's amazing to see this history here, and it's preserved in the collection of the Oklahoma Historical Society. And so lastly, in the few minutes we have, and I'm glad we're wrapping up so we can have some time for questions, is to create. So you're doing all this research, you're learning all this stuff, great, amazing. What are you going to do with it? And so I encourage people to create artifacts so the information can be preserved and shared. It synthesizes what you learned. It creates an opportunity for story keeping, so you can pass it on. It's an opportunity to connect with others because you can share the story. You can learn from other stories, and you can choose whatever format speaks to you. Some people write books, some people write articles. For me, I've done different things, and I have some pictures of a scrapbook. I'm a scrapbooker, and so I made a scrapbook of my family's veteran history. And so this is the cover, and I did it on my computer, so I was able to print it out. And these are some interior pages. That's my dad and some of his veteran story. And I have different pictures that I collected over time. And yes, some more information. My father's, from my husband's side of the family, their documents, headstones, things like that. Also quilting. And so quilting is a way for folks to document family stories. And so for this, I actually found from the Oklahoma City Metropolitan Library System's website, there was a recent quilter that shared a presentation. It was pretty amazing. She made this quilt documenting the Black towns of Oklahoma. So you could see this on their Facebook page, actually. And then I did want to mention film, because we do have Sir Solomon Jones and the films that he created in his life. And so he did this in the 1920s, documented Black life through film. And those films have been saved and they're available for us to watch. And so you too can choose film as your way to capture your family stories and to save them for the future. So with that, we are actually going to come back to our story painter, and because I remember we talked about him at the beginning. And so Jacob Lawrence. And so he painted and he captured the stories of Black folks and migrations and the Great Migration. And he made that documentation. And one thing that he said here is that, it's the little things that are big. And Jacob Lawrence was a veteran. And so he painted military folks earlier in his career. And he explained that, even if someone doesn't see combat, they can be a very important person. The man at the guns, there's glamour there, but the cooks might not like my style of painting, but they appreciate the fact that I'm painting a cook. So stories matter, your family stories matter, what happened, and then what happens today. So please document that for the future. And so with that, I think we have some time for questions. And so I have my contemporary family pictures to close. And so that's me with my siblings and parents on the left, and then me with my husband and kids on the right. And then my obligatory Star Wars reference here with the Legos. And so let me stop sharing. Christina, you can lead us into any Q&A.
Well, thank you. That was a fantastic presentation. We do have several questions. People are
Okay.
very interested in this topic and in what you can share. The first question I have here is a question about finding more information. Oh, sorry. About enslaved Blacks in the Creek tribe from online resources,
Okay.
or from Black towns that no longer exist.
Okay, so that's two questions. So one is Creek Freedmen, and then the second is towns that no longer exist. Okay. So I'll take the Creek Freedman part. So again, if you have not looked at the materials that Angela Walton Raji has created, please do. So again, this one, Black Indian genealogy research. And then with other information, her blog post, and with Freedmen, the National Archives record sets. And so if you have a library membership, you can go on Fold 3 or use Ancestry. And so familiarize yourself with the DAWS record set, so DAWS cards, the information packets. And so that's a place to start. And in terms of places that no longer exist, that's interesting. I feel like I could speak on that more because actually on my map, Dokesville is a ghost town and it doesn't exist, right? But when we research, we're researching across time. And so I mentioned Black newspapers, but more specifically, if you look at newspapers, regardless of who wrote them across time, you'll be able to see information about the time. So I have newspaper articles that describe in detail information about Dokesville or Boggy Depot that are no longer in existence. So for towns that don't exist anymore, look at newspapers of that time in the 19th century or whatever, and you'll learn information. And then also learn if there's any successor counties or what have you, because sometimes records were transferred to somewhere else. And I'm sure that you all at the Historical Society could provide some guidance on that. But yes, I'll just leave it at that for that question.
Fantastic. Are you familiar with any research products that look at the various African-Diasporic peoples within Indian Territory during the 19th century that speaks to freedmen of the Five Tribes?
Okay.
Actually, it goes on and other things, but if you want me to stop there, I can.
And so when you say product, do you mean like a reference?
I think they're looking for resources, yes. And
Okay.
so they're looking for freedmen of the Five Tribes, the buffalo soldiers stationed here, and cattle
Okay.
drivers on the trails, any of these.
Okay. Yeah, and it's like I might share some titles of different folks as well. Because with respect to and remember, what was the second? So
Buffalo soldiers stationed
okay.
here.
Oh, station here. Okay. Because there's I'll have to follow up with that person. A museum, a Buffalo Soldiers Museum. And I can even write that down. But yeah, I will follow up in the materials with that one because right off the top of my head I can't. But Buffalo Soldiers Museum.
And we have these questions connected to the email addresses that
Okay, so I
submitted
can
them, so we
research.
can make sure to get a response to you, Carrie. And
Okay.
then the next question is, well, there's just a comment about Dreammaker's Dream Breakers book about Justice Marshall's life being
Okay.
excellent. And
Great.
then a question here, how did self-knowledge of freedmen as tribal cultural communities morph into, okay, I'm going to start over.
Oh,
How did self-knowledge of freedmen as tribal cultural communities morph into a single story of state Blacks? And how did freedmen become eliminated from the Oklahoma story?
um, that's a very interesting topic that could be its own standalone session. So I guess I can say a few things. So one, um, the story of freedmen, I think it's important to consider the role of indigenous erasure and how that also contributes to it. Because if you don't have an understanding of tribal governments, tribal people groups, then you're not going to understand freedmen too. And so everything just kind of will bleed together. But if we can see tribal governments and people groups, then we can understand their stories and then understand people of African descent within those stories as well. And also with maybe just not listening or paying attention to detail. And that's one reason why at the beginning of my presentation, I talked about the diaspora. And it really depends on what place and time you're talking about and what people group. So, not paying attention to detail, listening to the communities themselves and how they describe themselves. And then maybe a lack of transfer. So it's important to preserve and then also to tell the stories. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that for that question.
Also, a comment that the Oklahoma Cemetery, wait, no, I'm sorry. The Oklahoma Cemetery
Oh,
recorded a bit more of the Black community that involved freedmen from the Five Tribes.
okay. So that's another newspaper. So thank you for sharing that one. Yeah, there's so many. And I think that's one takeaway from this presentation. Please read the newspapers in Oklahoma and in other states. And I can't speak for all states, but other states that I've had family connections to and research, it's not as easy to find newspapers or they're not as many. But in Oklahoma, we're very blessed to have newspapers to look at as a record set for our research.
And if you don't have direct access to those resources from home, the research center here at the Oklahoma History Center has access, and you can access it from their computers. And they have a lot of really wonderful staff who can help you with other questions as well while you're working on that. I will read a couple more of these. Considering the strong Seminole and Creek freedmen presence in Wewoka, did the Black Dispatch reflect them in any frequency?
That's an interesting question. I would say at times, and let's say because things were very specific. So, if you're talking about individuals, you will definitely hear about James Cootie Johnson. So, who is a Creek Freedman, the Black Panther. He is mentioned in that newspaper. So you will see articles about him, and then the Black Fair that he organized. I can't remember what time period. But I should also say I have not read through all the time periods. I've focused on a lot of the resource that have been digitized. But you will hear some about them, but you definitely need to have other types of records to interpret with it to get a full picture.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to scan through some of these. We do have
Okay.
a lot of questions, and I think what we will have to do is provide these questions to you so that you could give some individual responses back for folks we can't reach
Okay.
during this presentation. But there is a question asking, does Chickasaw Nation have publicly available archives for people to search within?
That I am not familiar with. So I have not researched on the ground in the Chickasaw Nation personally.
And then let's see. I'm going to go back over here, and we've got the Black tribal towns of the the Black tribal towns of the Creek Nation are in ancestry as town census rolls. The towns were Arkansas, Canadian, and Norfolk tribal towns.
Okay.
And then a note that it's important that the 20,000 freedmen are reflected more in the Oklahoma state narrative. And I agree.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I am actually I am going to call it here. We're at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Shelby. We do have a number of other questions. If you submitted a question and it hasn't been answered, we did receive it. Thank you so much. We'll get those questions to you, Shelby, so that you'll have the opportunity to reach out to those individuals directly.
Okay, wonderful. So
And
thank you so much again.
yes, and we really appreciate you having here. This is a phenomenal presentation. Thank you to everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you for future presentations that we're offering. Thank you.